The old man, Arthur Jenkins, moved with the deliberate cadence of seasons, each step a testament to winters endured and springs embraced. His hands, gnarled like ancient oak roots, still held a surprising gentleness. This particular morning, the chill of late autumn nipped at his worn coat, but the sun, a pale disk in the vast blue, promised a sliver of warmth. Beside him, Deuce, a golden retriever whose fur mirrored that weak sunlight, padded with the quiet dignity only a truly devoted companion possessed. Deuce was more than a dog. He was an extension of Arthur's own waning senses, a furry, four-legged guardian of his fragile peace. Arthur had been a medic, a lifetime ago, in a war that history books now condensed into a few stark paragraphs. The sounds, the smells, the screams, they had faded, not into oblivion, but into the quiet hum beneath his daily life, a constant, low thrum that Deuce's presence somehow soothed. He didn't speak of it, not anymore. There were fewer and fewer who would understand the language of that particular anguish. His wife, Martha, had understood. She had been his anchor in the turbulent waters of memory. But Martha was gone, 5 years now, and the silence in their small cottage sometimes grew vast enough to swallow him whole. Today, however, was not a day for succumbing to shadows. It was the anniversary of the day he'd first brought Martha a small, wild rose from the woods behind their home, a clumsy offering from a young man unsure of love. He always marked it, in his own quiet way. A good breakfast, perhaps, at a place a little nicer than his usual modest fare, a small pilgrimage to the memory of joy. As they neared the town square, a flurry of motion and distressed cries caught Arthur's attention. A young woman, her face, a mask of frazzled frustration, wrestled with a rebellious stroller, a wailing toddler, and a cascade of groceries tumbling from a burst paper bag. Apples rolled like errant billiard balls across the cobblestones, oranges bounced with cheerful abandon, and a box of cereal lay splayed open, its contents dusting the ground. People hurried past, their eyes averted, cocooned in their own morning rush. Arthur paused. His back ached with a familiar throb, a souvenir from a lifetime of labor after the war, and his knee protested any sudden movement. But the sight of the woman's distress, her near tears, tugged at something deep within him, that old medic's instinct to mend, to soothe. "Easy now, son," he murmured to Deuce, who sat patiently, his intelligent eyes fixed on Arthur. With a slow, deliberate effort, Arthur bent down, his joints groaning in protest. He began to gather the scattered fruit, his large, weathered hands surprisingly deft. "Oh, please, don't trouble yourself," the young woman stammered, her cheeks flushed crimson. "I'm so clumsy." "Nonsense, dear," Arthur said, his voice soft, a little gravelly with disuse. "Happens to the best of us. Let's get these rounded up before they make a great escape." Deuce, unbidden, nudged a rolling orange gently back towards Arthur's hand with his nose, then lay down quietly, a furry sentinel guarding the salvaged goods. The toddler, momentarily distracted by the dog, quieted his sobs to a series of hiccuping sniffs. Together, Arthur and the young woman retrieved the errant groceries. He managed to coax the broken cereal box into a semblance of order, tucking the plastic bag inside more securely. He even offered his own sturdy canvas tote, which he always carried, to help her manage the load. I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're a lifesaver. Everyone else just walked by." Arthur merely smiled, a slight, gentle curve of his lips. "It's no trouble at all, just glad to help." He gave the toddler a small, understanding nod. "Little one's got a good set of lungs." The woman laughed, a genuine, relieved sound. "He certainly does. Thank you again, truly." She hesitated, then added, "God bless you." Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest, a fleeting sensation, but welcome. He tipped his old tweed cap. "You have a good day now." He and Deuce continued on their way, the small act of kindness settling into Arthur like a warm drink on a cold day. He didn't think of it as anything grand or noteworthy. It was just what one did. Or what one ought to do. He was unaware entirely that this simple gesture, this quiet offering of help, was but the first ripple in a day that would unfold in ways he could never have foreseen. A day where the echoes of his past and the principles he lived by would be tested and, unexpectedly, affirmed. He was simply a humble man, walking with his faithful dog, seeking a small measure of comfort in a world that often forgot the quiet sacrifices of men like him. Their destination was the Gilded Spoon, a restaurant that had opened a few years prior, aiming for an air of provincial elegance. Arthur had never been, but Martha had once pointed it out, saying it looked fancy, her eyes twinkling. He'd saved a little, and today felt like the right day to spend it. He wanted to sit by a window, watch the world go by, and remember Martha's smile. Deuce, he knew, would lie patiently at his feet, a silent, comforting presence. The entrance to the Gilded Spoon was framed by polished brass and dark, gleaming wood. A discreet sign indicated its hours of operation, but nothing about canine companions. Arthur, holding Deuce's leash, firmly but gently, opened the door. The interior was dimly lit, hushed, with the clink of silverware and murmured conversations hanging in the air. A young man in a starched white shirt and black waistcoat, presumably the host or manager, approached them, an impeccably polite but cool smile fixed on his face. "Good morning, sir," the manager said, his eyes flicking from Arthur's worn coat to Deuce, then back again. "A table for one?" "Yes, please," Arthur replied, his voice soft. "And my service dog, Deuce." He gestured slightly towards the clearly marked harness Deuce wore. The manager's smile faltered, replaced by a subtle frown. "I'm afraid we have a strict no-pets policy, sir." Arthur felt a familiar weariness settle over him. He'd encountered this before, though not often. "He's a service animal," Arthur explained patiently. "He's trained to assist me. It's permissible by law." The manager, a Mr. Henderson, according to his name tag, stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Our establishment's policy is quite clear, sir. We cannot allow animals inside for hygiene reasons and the comfort of our other guests." He seemed to recite the words, as if from a memorized script. He did not ask about Arthur's disability, nor did he look at Deuce's vest again. He saw an old man and a dog, an inconvenience. "But he's not just a pet," Arthur tried again, his voice still gentle, though a hint of dismay crept in. "He's medically necessary." "He's very well behaved. He'll just lie down quietly." Deuce, as if on cue, sat perfectly still, his tail giving a single soft thump on the polished floorboards. Mr. Henderson's expression became more resolute, tinged with a hint of impatience. "I understand, sir, but policy is policy. We can't make exceptions. Perhaps you could find alternative arrangements for your dog?" The word dog was uttered with a faint emphasis that made Arthur flinch inwardly. The dismissal was not just of Deuce, but of him, of his needs, of his quiet dignity. The warmth from his earlier encounter with the young mother began to evaporate, replaced by a cold knot in his stomach. He looked around the hushed dining room. A few patrons glanced their way, their curiosity quickly masked by a return to their meals. No one met his eye. Arthur was not a man prone to confrontation. His life had taught him the futility of arguing against ingrained indifference. The war had shown him horrors that dwarfed this small daily slight, yet in its own way this felt like a fresh wound, a reminder of a world that often didn't see or chose not to. He drew a slow breath. "Very well," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The light seemed to dim a little further. He turned, the simple movement feeling heavy, laden with a disappointment that was far older than this single moment. "Come on, Deuce." Deuce, ever attuned to Arthur's moods, rose with a soft sigh and padded silently beside him towards the door. The aroma of coffee and baked goods, which had seemed so inviting moments before, now felt cloying, a scent of a comfort deliberately withheld. Arthur didn't look back. He just wanted to be away, to find a quiet bench somewhere and share the sandwich he had in his pocket with his faithful friend. The gilded spoon, it seemed, was not gilded for everyone. Unseen by Arthur as he stepped back into the crisp autumn air, a man seated at a corner table near the window lowered his newspaper slightly, his gaze following the retreating figures of the old veteran and his dog. His face, etched with lines of thought and quiet authority, remained impassive, but his eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a keen, discerning light. Colonel Alistair Finch, retired, had witnessed the entire exchange. Colonel Finch was a man accustomed to observing, to assessing situations with a calm, practiced eye. He had commanded men in far more perilous circumstances than a disagreement in a pretentious bistro. He preferred anonymity in his retirement, content to read his paper, drink his coffee, and let the world spin on without his direct intervention. But something about the quiet dignity of the old man, the way he carried himself despite the threadbare coat, the almost regal composure of the golden retriever, had caught his attention even before the unfortunate confrontation with Mr. Henderson. He'd noticed the almost imperceptible tremor in the old man's hands as he'd reached for the door, the slight stiffness in his gait that spoke of old injuries. He'd also seen the discreet pin on Arthur's lapel, a combat medic badge, small and unassuming, but to Finch it blazed like a beacon. He knew what that badge signified: courage under fire, selflessness in the face of unimaginable horror, a commitment to easing suffering amidst chaos. The manager's dismissive tone, his rote recitation of policy, without a flicker of human understanding or even basic legal awareness regarding service animals, had struck a dissonant chord within the colonel. It wasn't just a breach of etiquette or even law. It was a fundamental failure of respect, a casual disregard for a debt that society often forgot it owed. Finch had seen too many good men and women return from their service, bearing wounds both visible and invisible, only to face a wall of indifference, of bureaucracy, of a world that had moved on without them. He watched Arthur and Deuce disappear from view, the old man's shoulders a little more stooped than when he had entered. A familiar anger, cold and controlled, began to smolder within Finch. It was the same anger he'd felt when confronted with military incompetence that cost lives, or the callousness of bureaucrats who denied essential support to those who had sacrificed. Mr. Henderson, meanwhile, had returned to his station near the entrance, a self-satisfied air about him, as if he had successfully defended the establishment from some grave threat. He smoothed his waistcoat, adjusted his tie, and prepared to greet the next potential patron with his practiced, impersonal smile. Colonel Finch folded his newspaper deliberately, placing it precisely beside his coffee cup. He took a slow sip of the lukewarm coffee, his mind working with swift, decisive clarity. The significance of the moment, initially a flicker of indignation, now solidified into a resolve. This was not merely about one old soldier and his dog being denied a meal. It was about a principle. It was about honor. It was about ensuring that the gilded facade of places like this did not mask a core of hollow indifference. He beckoned Mr. Henderson with a slight, almost imperceptible movement of his hand. The manager, seeing a patron request attention, approached the table, his professional smile firmly in place. "Yes, sir? Is everything to your satisfaction?" "No, Mr. Henderson," Colonel Finch said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of command. "It is not." Mr. Henderson's smile faltered slightly. "I'm very sorry to hear that, sir. Is there something wrong with your meal, or the service?" "The service," Finch stated, his gaze direct and unwavering, "has been found wanting. Not to me, personally, but to a man who deserved far better." He paused, letting his words settle. "The gentleman with the golden retriever, who you just turned away." Henderson's composure tightened. He clearly remembered the incident, but chose a path of polite obfuscation. "Ah, yes. As I explained to him, sir, we have a strict policy regarding animals in the establishment, for hygiene and— He informed you it was a service animal, Finch interjected, his tone still level, but with an edge of steel. Are you familiar with the laws pertaining to service animals, Mr. Henderson? They are not pets, they are medical aids, extensions of the individuals they assist. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Well, sir, our corporate guidelines are quite specific. We are instructed to— Your corporate guidelines, Finch said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more resonant, do not supersede federal law, nor, it seems, do they encompass basic human decency or respect for those who have served this country. He saw the combat medic badge again in his mind's eye. That man, Mr. Henderson, wore a combat medic badge. Do you have any comprehension of what that entails? Of the sacrifices made, the lives saved, often at great personal risk, so that people like you and I can sit in comfortable establishments and debate policy. The manager paled slightly. Other diners, sensing the shift in atmosphere, began to cast discreet glances towards their table. The quiet murmur of conversation in the restaurant seemed to diminish. I was not aware of his background, Henderson stammered, his earlier confidence evaporating. I was merely trying to uphold our standards. Standards, Finch repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. An interesting choice of word. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me, Mr. Henderson, what do you imagine the owner of the Gilded Spoon would consider a higher standard? An arbitrary rule about animals, or the honor of welcoming a man who has given more for his country than most people could ever comprehend? Henderson was silent, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Finch continued, his voice calm, almost conversational, yet utterly implacable. I find this establishment's current management lacking, its priorities skewed, its understanding of true value non-existent. He paused, then delivered the sentence that hung in the air like a detonation. What is the price for this restaurant, Mr. Henderson? The manager stared, dumbfounded. I beg your pardon, sir. The price, Finch reiterated, enunciating each word with precision. To purchase the Gilded Spoon, the entire establishment, I am prepared to make an offer. A stunned silence fell over the nearby tables. Henderson looked as if he'd been struck. Sir, I don't think— It's not for sale. Everything has a price, Mr. Henderson, Finch stated, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, though it did not reach his eyes. And I assure you, my offer will be compelling. Perhaps you could contact the owner for me? I believe a conversation is in order. A conversation about new management and a new set of standards. He reached into his breast pocket and retrieved a sleek, modern smartphone, then a card case. He laid a plain, embossed card on the table. Alistair Finch, tell him I'll be waiting for his call. And tell him that the first order of business under new proprietorship will be to offer a sincere apology and a permanent open invitation to the veteran medic and his service dog. The air in the Gilded Spoon crackled with an unspoken energy. Patrons exchanged bewildered, excited glances. Mr. Henderson, looking utterly routed, could only nod mutely, his gaze fixed on the card as if it were a royal decree. Colonel Finch had not raised his voice, had not made a scene in the conventional sense, yet he had, with a few carefully chosen words and an audacious proposal, irrevocably altered the course of the morning, and perhaps the future of the Gilded Spoon itself. The second act had indeed revealed its significance. A quiet, personal stand against indifference was escalating into a full-blown reclamation of honor. While Mr. Henderson scurried away, presumably to make a panicked call to the owner, Colonel Finch calmly finished his coffee. He felt a grim satisfaction. He wasn't a man given to impulsive gestures, but this felt right, necessary. He thought of his own men, the ones who had come home changed, the ones who struggled to find their place in a civilian world that often seemed to have forgotten their sacrifices. He thought of the quiet courage of men like Arthur Jenkins, who asked for so little and deserved so much. This gesture wasn't just for Arthur, it was for all of them. The owner of the Gilded Spoon, a Mr. Sterling, was, as it happened, a man Finch knew peripherally from some long-ago business association. Sterling was an investor, more interested in profit margins than the daily operations of his varied enterprises. When Henderson finally reached him, conveying the unbelievable offer and the name Alistair Finch, Sterling was initially incredulous, then intrigued. Finch was known for his acumen and his integrity. He wasn't a man to make frivolous proposals. The ensuing phone call between Finch and Sterling was brief, and to the point. Finch didn't haggle. He named a figure that was more than generous, a sum that would allow Sterling a handsome profit and a clean exit. He explained his motivations succinctly, without melodrama, appealing not to Sterling's sentimentality, which Finch suspected was in short supply, but to his business sense, and perhaps a dormant sense, of propriety. "Consider it an investment in correcting an oversight, Sterling," Finch had said, "and an opportunity for you to divest from a situation that, shall we say, reflects poorly on your establishment's character." To Finch's mild surprise, Sterling, after a moment of calculation, agreed with remarkable alacrity. Perhaps he was tired of the restaurant business, or perhaps Finch's reputation, combined with the undeniably attractive offer, made the decision an easy one. Lawyers would be involved, of course, papers would need to be signed, but the core agreement was struck with a speed that startled even Finch. The Gilded Spoon, it appeared, was his. News of the impending sale, or at least the dramatic offer, began to filter through the remaining patrons. A low hum of conversation replaced the earlier stunned silence. One elderly woman, who had witnessed the initial refusal of Arthur, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. A younger man at a nearby table actually began to applaud softly, a gesture quickly emulated by a few others. Mr. Henderson, observing this, looked even more crestfallen, the realization dawning that his adherence to policy had been a profound misjudgment. Finch, however, paid little mind to the shifting atmosphere within the restaurant. His thoughts were with the old medic. He rose from his table, settled his original bill, a detail he would not overlook, and walked towards the entrance. He needed to find Arthur Jenkins. Arthur and Deuce hadn't gone far. They had found a weathered wooden bench in a small, sun-dappled parquet just off the main square. Arthur had unwrapped the simple cheese and pickle sandwich he'd packed, a contingency just in case, and shared it with Deuce, who accepted his portion with gentle dignity. The earlier sting of rejection had dulled to a familiar ache of resignation. This was the world, he thought, sometimes kind, as with the young mother, sometimes indifferent, as with the Gilded Spoon. One learned to navigate its currents. He was absently stroking Deuce's soft fur when he saw a figure approaching. It was the man from the restaurant, the one with the piercing eyes and the quiet air of command. Arthur felt a moment of apprehension. Had he come to further admonish him? Colonel Finch stopped before them, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a slight, almost imperceptible softening occurred around his eyes. "Mr. Jenkins, I presume?" he asked, his voice respectful. Arthur nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." "Alistair Finch," the colonel introduced himself, offering a hand. Arthur took it, surprised by the firmness of the grip, the sense of latent strength. "I was in the restaurant. I saw what happened." Arthur looked down. "It's all right, sir. Policies, you know." "Some policies, Mr. Jenkins," Finch said, his voice gentle but firm, "are made to be challenged, especially when they lack sense and compassion." He paused. "I served. Army. Saw your CMB? Korea?" Arthur looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Yes, sir. 'Twond Infantry Division, long time ago." It was rare for anyone to recognize the pin, rarer still for them to understand its weight. "A long time indeed. Finch acknowledged with a nod. Vietnam, myself. Different jungles, same mud, same courage required of men like you. A bond, unspoken yet profound, passed between them, the shared understanding of those who had seen the stark realities of war. Mr. Jenkins, Finch continued, the Gilded Spoon is, as of a few moments ago, under new management. Mine, to be precise. Arthur stared, his mind struggling to process the words. New management? You bought it? Finch gave a small, almost self-deprecating shrug. It seemed the most efficient way to rectify a lapse in judgment, and I find myself with some time on my hands in retirement. He then smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his stern features. My first official act as proprietor is to invite you and Deuce to be my honored guests for breakfast. Or lunch, if you prefer. The kitchen is at your disposal. Arthur was speechless. He looked from Finch to Deuce, then back to Finch. The magnitude of the gesture, the sheer unexpectedness of it overwhelmed him. I don't know what to say, sir. Say you'll join me, Finch said simply. It would be my privilege. Tears welled in Arthur's eyes, surprising him. Not tears of sadness, but of a profound, heart-aching gratitude. It wasn't just about a meal. It was about being seen, being acknowledged, being respected. It was about the restoration of dignity, so quietly, so easily bruised. We'd be honored, Colonel Finch, Arthur managed, his voice thick with emotion. Alistair, please, Finch corrected gently. And the honor is all mine, Arthur. They walked back towards the Gilded Spoon together, the retired colonel and the old medic, with Deuce padding faithfully between them. As they approached, Mr. Henderson, looking pale and anxious, hurried to open the door, his demeanor now one of almost frantic deference. Mr. Finch, sir! Mr. Jenkins! Welcome, welcome! He stammered. Finch gave him a cool, appraising look. Mr. Henderson, please see that a table by the window is prepared for Mr. Jenkins and myself, and bring a bowl of fresh water for Deuce. Of course, sir. Immediately. Arthur and Alistair Finch were seated at the best table in the house, sunlight streaming through the window. Deuce lay comfortably at Arthur's feet, sighing contentedly. They didn't talk of war, not directly. They spoke of simpler things, of favorite books, of the changing seasons, of the quiet companionship of good dogs. Finch listened more than he spoke, drawing Arthur out, his genuine interest evident. Arthur, feeling a warmth and acceptance he hadn't experienced in a long time, found himself speaking more freely than he had in years. Other patrons watched, some with open curiosity, others with dawning understanding. The story of the colonel who bought a restaurant to right a wrong was already beginning to take on the shape of local legend. But for Arthur, it was simply a moment of profound, quiet recognition. He felt no desire for public glory, no need for fanfare. The sincere respect in Alistair Finch's eyes, the quiet dignity of this shared meal, was more than enough. It was a balm to old wounds, a testament to the enduring power of principled kindness. The Gilded Spoon, under its new, unexpected stewardship, felt less gilded and more genuinely golden. In the weeks that followed, the Gilded Spoon underwent a quiet transformation. The name was the first thing to change. After some thought, Colonel Finch, with a nod to both steadfastness and welcoming warmth, renamed it the Anchor Hearth, a new sign, crafted from dark, seasoned oak with lettering in simple, elegant gold leaf, was installed above the entrance. Inside, the changes were subtle but significant. The overly formal atmosphere eased, the lighting became a little warmer, the music softer, and near the entrance, where Mr. Rady Henderson once stood guard with his rulebook, a small, tastefully framed notice appeared. It read, "The Anchor Hearth is dedicated to all who have served, in whatever capacity, and to the loyal companions who guide, support, and comfort them. Here, Respect is our policy, and all are welcome. A special place is reserved for those who have borne the cost of freedom, and for the service animals who stand faithfully by their side. Mr. Henderson, surprisingly, was kept on, though his role shifted. Colonel Finch, a keen judge of character, sensed that the man's earlier actions stemmed more from misguided adherence to poorly conceived rules than from inherent malice. Under Finch's quiet tutelage, Henderson began to learn about true service, about empathy, and about the importance of looking beyond the surface. He was often seen now greeting guests with a more genuine warmth, and he always had a fresh bowl of water ready for any service animal that accompanied a patron. Arthur Jenkins became a regular at the Anchor hearth. He and Deuce would often occupy their sunlit table by the window. He never sought special treatment, and Finch never offered it in a way that felt like charity. It was simply an understanding, a quiet camaraderie. Sometimes they would share a coffee and a conversation. Other times, Arthur would simply enjoy his meal in peaceful contemplation, Deuce resting at his feet, the hum of the restaurant, a comforting backdrop. The staff, taking their cue from Finch, treated Arthur with a gentle, unobtrusive respect that warmed his old heart. One crisp afternoon, about a month after the change in ownership, Arthur arrived with a small, carefully wrapped parcel. He found Colonel Finch reviewing some ledgers in a quiet booth. "Alistair," Arthur said, approaching the table, "I brought something for the place, if you don't mind." Finch looked up, a welcoming smile on his face. "Arthur, good to see you. What have you got there?" Arthur carefully unwrapped the parcel to reveal a small, sturdy terracotta pot containing a vibrant, healthy rosemary plant. "It's for remembrance," Arthur said softly, his gaze distant for a moment, perhaps touching on memories of Martha or comrades lost long ago, and for steadfastness thought it might suit the Anchor hearth. Finch was deeply touched. He knew the symbolism. He rose and took the plant gently from Arthur. "It's perfect, Arthur. Thank you. We'll find a special spot for it, right here in the light." He placed the rosemary plant on the windowsill of their favored table, where the afternoon sun would catch its fragrant leaves. It was a small thing, a simple herb, yet it felt profoundly significant, a symbol of the quiet decency that had taken root in this place. The story of the Colonel and the restaurant spread through the town, not as a sensational headline, but as a slowly unfurling narrative of unexpected kindness and principled action. People came not just for the food, which was excellent, but for the atmosphere, for the feeling of genuine welcome that permeated the Anchor hearth. Veterans, in particular, found it a haven, a place where their service was quietly acknowledged and their presence honored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Colonel Finch stood by the window, looking out at the town square. The lights of the Anchor hearth cast a warm glow onto the street. He saw Arthur Jenkins and Deuce walking slowly home, their silhouettes outlined against the fading light. Arthur paused, looked back at the restaurant, and raised a hand in a simple, quiet salute before continuing on his way. Finch felt a profound sense of peace. He hadn't sought to be a hero, only to uphold a standard, to correct an injustice. He hadn't bought a restaurant. He had, perhaps, bought back a small piece of honor, for Arthur, for himself, for all those who deserved to be remembered. He touched the leaves of the rosemary plant on the windowsill. Its scent, a faint, hopeful promise in the twilight. Under the vast, open sky, the quiet echo of a kind act, once offered to a stranger in need, had returned, not tenfold, but in a measure of warmth and respect that nourished the soul, promising new growth, like a well-tended hearth in the heart of the community.